Today, I'd like to share a story with you about how I recently almost got massively screwed over purchasing a car. Buckle up for this one because on this episode, we have Porsche GT4s, we have absolutely destroyed strut towers, and super shoddy repairs. Hello, everyone. My name is Kurt, and you're watching Eat, Sleep, Drive. I guess the cat is out of the bag, and the next project I was hoping to bring to the channel was a Porsche. Now, the GT4 is traditionally way more expensive than I can afford. I could not bring one of these cars to the channel at a regular clean title price. They're like at least 80 or 90 grand, which is way more than I can afford. But I have a bit of a problem. I'm always looking for cars online, and I found one that was very cheap, 73 grand. I'll show you the posting here. It was posted on Auto Trader, and I started to think, maybe I could cobble enough money together to put a decent offer in for this car. So here's the ad. The gentleman has taken it down since we've had this whole ordeal, and I will get more to that. But fortunately, I saved it. So it has a couple mods. It's mostly intake and exhaust mods, and of course a wing riser with making it this super ridiculous wing, and this livery for his company. This gentleman bought this car to basically be a showpiece for his new company and to try and bring business in. So he hasn't driven it too much, but if you look at it, I mean, it looks in these tiny photos, like it looks like a nice car. I mean, it's complete, number one. And, you know, he's been driving it around. It has the 918 carbon bucket seats, which is pretty cool. It's got these aftermarket wheels and stuff. But of course, the reason that it's 73 grand is because it has a rebuilt title. So I called this guy on the phone, and he said he bought it from the person who rebuilt it, who allegedly autocrossed it, and he's used it for the showpiece. He said it drives great. It doesn't have any issues at all. And I'm thinking, okay, well, 73 grand, you know, I'm willing to take on a rebuilt car as long as it's been done properly. That's okay with me. I'll take that because it's so much cheaper than a clean title car. So the big thing is he couldn't provide any documentation as far as who fixed the car. And that's troubling to me. So I was like, well, if I can't find documentation for who fixed it, what if I could at least find photos of what it looked like before? Thank you, Google. Enter Google. Sure enough, it was on an auction site when it was wrecked. And if you look at these at first, just glancing, you're like, well, really doesn't look too bad. Like that amount of damage totaled a car to the fact that they basically wrote off the entire thing. It's like, you know, a little bit of front side impact and stuff like that. But if you look closer, you'll notice something that is very crucial to this whole story. Look at this hood and then look at the strut top right here. See, the GT3s and GT4s, maybe you've heard, have had this sort of bad problem where if you hit a pothole or any sort of bump with enough force, that the aluminum strut towers tend to fracture and break, which sends the strut straight through the strut tower and basically into the hood. That's no bueno at all. And this is a common problem that I'll show you. Just if you just Google GT3 or GT4 strut tower failure, look at all of these results. Like there are a lot of people who have had this problem. Some of them have cracked and, you know, kind of still held. Some of them have gone completely through. And I'm thinking, okay, well, this is probably why this car was totaled out. It had the infamous strut tower failure. But even that wasn't enough to deter me, because what I did was Google, how do they repair that? Is that something that you could legitimately repair? And sure enough, Porsche has a pretty legitimate fix for it. Because these cars are modularly designed up there, the strut tower itself can be replaced. Here's a photo of one that you can kind of see with everything taken away. This is a separate piece from the actual, you know, unibody of the car, and it attaches down there, and it attaches up top here. And this is a photo or a series of photos from someone who got the repair done at a Porsche dealer. You see what they do here is they put this car on this jig. That's what all this like blue stuff is. That's the way that they can align this to where everything will line up to what it was factory. Like all the points, all the suspension points line up and everything like that. And that's super critical when you are putting something together like this, because if you don't get that right, the alignment will never be right and stuff like that. So the fact that there was a legitimate fix out there was like, okay, well, if this was legitimately fixed, I'm still good with buying the car. Once again, I'm apparently a lunatic because none of this stuff so far has deterred me. We started talking price a little bit, and I should have been worried when, with very little negotiating at all, I got him down to 67 grand, and that's $6,000 less than he had the car posted for. Once again, with very little negotiating. So that should have been red flag number one. But I said, I will pay 67 grand as long as it passes a pre-purchase inspection. If you're not familiar, a pre-purchase inspection is something that you do to a car to, if you're buying it remotely, or even if you're just buying it locally, it's to have a qualified mechanic look at the car and make sure everything's kosher. So I had him take it to a shop, and what we found is rather surprising. And subsequently, I didn't end up buying the car for all of these reasons. So let's talk first before we even get to the strut tower, because that was the big thing I was worried about. Was the strut tower repaired properly? The first video that the gentleman sent me that was something I was very concerned about was the fact that the front struts, both of them, were severely bent. This video you're about to see is the gentleman taking the top nut with a wrench and rotating the top nut of the strut. And if you could imagine on a strut that is straight, like if the shaft in the center is straight, it's just a cylinder, it's just going to rotate and like not adjust the knuckle or anything about the orientation of the hub itself. But on this car with two bent front struts, this happens. The hub and knuckle rotate around because of how bent the shaft is on that strut. That should not happen. When you rotate that, it should not be moving around like that. So that's the bad side. That's like the side of the initial or the impact. This is the passenger side. Not nearly as bent, but still bent. Not good at all. The next thing that he showed me was a video of the steering rack, because when he drove it, he's like, the steering rack is making a very weird noise, something that is not normal. So he starts playing around with the steering rack on the rack. That is not supposed to happen. A steering rack is not supposed to make that noise. And he suspected that from that impact, it probably chipped a tooth or something. So for sure, the steering rack should be replaced and was not, or should have been replaced and was not. As if that wasn't enough, various, and I mean various, suspension components around this car have either cracks or were bent. So you have like an end link here. You have a control arm that's bent. You have what looks like another end link that's super bent here. This is a piece near the top of the strut, which is aluminum piece that's broken off. This is supposed to be completed here. As if all of those things weren't enough, there's a bunch of cosmetic issues that they just didn't bother to repair. This is sort of the wheel well near where it meets the door. You could see under the car is all scratched up back to the wheel well piece. They didn't even repair this plastic. And then we get to the strut towers. So the struts were so bent that the camber plates on this car, the way this car was aligned, was so weird. So if you look at the driver's side, the orientation of this is for max camber. And camber has to do with the orientation of the strut and the wheel in order for like a max contact patch, at least from a like performance car point of view. And the way this is oriented, that it's like max negative camber, which is definitely a thing for sports cars. But if you look at the passenger side, it's max positive camber. you see how, like, if it was max negative camber, they would be over here. But these struts are so bent, and somebody tried to align this car with these bent struts that, of course, they couldn't even get them remotely close. So it's just an absolute disaster. And then we finally get to the nail in the coffin. This is the strut tower repair. If you compare this with what is the proper repair from Porsche, they look nothing alike. The first thing you're going to notice is they didn't do any of the alignment rivets that Porsche uses on these jigs. You see these rivets down here? No, none of those whatsoever. You can see the empty part of the strut tower where those probably should be, but are not. And then, of course, look at like just the adhesive itself, which is the adhesive is actually really what holds these strut towers on. But it looks like a child used super glue and just globbed it on here. Like, nothing about this looks professional in any way, especially when you compare it to this photo of it being done properly. And of course, you know, for all these reasons and the fact that the person that did the PPI mentioned that visibly it didn't even line up with the other side strut tower. Clearly they didn't use a jig like these photos here with a proper repair. They didn't use a jig. They just threw the strut tower on there, threw some adhesive and all of those things. So at this point, I'm like, well, this car is absolute trash. But the part that irked me the most was the fact that the person that did the PPI called the owner of the car before talking to me and told him all these things. And the person that owns the car went, that probably explains why the car tends to pull left sometimes and then randomly start pulling right. Like, how could you not tell me that? He told me the car drove completely fine, and you don't think that a car that changes alignment settings as you drive it is a perfectly fine car, let alone the steering rack making a horrible noise every time you turn it? Like, people are the worst. And if there's any lesson here, it's that don't trust anyone before you buy a car and get a pre-purchase inspection, because yes, I'm out $200 for the cost of the pre-purchase inspection, but thank God I didn't buy this absolute disaster of a car. So if you see this car come up in the Tennessee area, stay the hell away from it, in my opinion, because it is an absolute disaster and is going to take a lot of money to fix properly. Basically, you're going to have to undo everything that was shoddily done and do it again. I hope you guys enjoyed this story and found it interesting. I hope I can bring a worthy Porsche to the channel that we can have some fun with and make a project car. If you want to follow me in between episodes, Eat, Sleep, Drive TV on Instagram. Otherwise, if you've made it this far in the video, guys, I would appreciate if you subscribed if you enjoyed the content. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.